that seem right? Yeah? So if we have 500 people in here, and half of them are girls, then we have 250 girls with us here today. Now, statistically speaking, in the United States, rapists will attack 1 in 3 women. That means that if we apply this 33% national average to our group, 83 of the girls in this room is likely to experience rape at some point in her life. That is 83 of our classmates, 83 of our friends and girlfriends and sisters. That is 83 daughters and someday mothers and wives. The reality is that in our culture, women are not safe from sexual violence. And what if I told you that it gets worse? Because it does get worse. If this room were full of 500 Native American people, and 250 Indigenous women raised their hands when I asked, instead of 83 of us likely to experience rape in our lifetime, it would shoot up to 83% of us. That means that of the 250 girls in this room, 208 of us would experience rape at some point in our life. There is an epidemic of sexual violence facing Native American women and girls. They are simultaneously the most at risk for sexual violence and the least protected from it. I want to talk to you guys today about why this epidemic exists, why it has persisted for so long, and what we can do to fix it. So why are Indigenous women so at risk? There's not actually one answer to this question because there are so many factors and so many layers. But in my research, I found 3 major ones, and I'm sure there are more. So those are homelessness, substance abuse, and family separation. I'll get more into those later, but generally these are issues that plague Native American communities across the nation. And you might be asking, like, if these are Native American issues, if these are issues that afflict Native American communities, then these are what are fueling the sexual violence epidemic, then isn't this kind of like on Native American people, isn't this their issue? Answer is no. Because all of these things fall under the umbrella of poverty. And the epidemic of poverty in Native America can very clearly be traced back to marginalization, colonization, and white supremacy. Because had Native American people not had their population decimated, not had their land taken from them, not been marginalized and forced onto tiny, unusable pieces of land, perhaps they would not be so impoverished as they are today. So, if this epidemic is caused by issues that happened in the 16, 17, 1800s, if this is something that's caused by issues in the past, then shouldn't this have passed with time? So, why has this issue persisted? Because we have systems in our country that very deliberately are set up to make sure that this issue and other issues that plague Native American people does persist. And one of those systems is our legal system. A Native American person seeking justice for anything has to go through 3 courts. The tribal court, the state court, and the federal court. So, I don't know how much you guys know about legal systems, but they are very confusing. So it's very hard to navigate even one of them. So if you make someone navigate 3 of them, first of all, this is really hard to figure out, and second of all, this is setting someone up for a myriad of jurisdictional conflicts. In the case of a Native American woman who has experienced violence, so she has to go through the tribal court. Native American women can only press charges through the tribal court. However, non-Native people cannot be tried through the tribal court. This means that if a non-Native person is raping and exploiting Native American women, he literally cannot be charged in America. And on top of that, even if it is a Native American person who is exploiting women, the longest sentence that the United States government gives the tribal court power to grant is 3 years. So not only do you have all of these issues, all of these layers that fuel this epidemic, you also have systems in our country actively fueling it as well. So what can we do? In looking at any issue of sexual violence, we have to look at healing and prevention. Now, there are plenty of healing and prevention services available to the general public. There are health centers, there are rape crisis centers, there are survivor support groups. So why don't Native American women use these? The first issue is with availability, because these services tend to be more common and also a lot more well-kept in wealthy, more populated areas, and Native American women tend to live on reservations, or if not, they tend to live in very impoverished areas. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that these services are available to Native American women. And perhaps more than that, if you analyze the relationship between social services in this country and Native American people, it is not a great one. For hundreds of years, the Department of Children and Family Services separated Native American children from their families, forced them to go to abusive white foster parents or abusive Catholic boarding schools. In the 1970s, the Indian Health Organization, which is a government organization, forced 10,000 Native American women to be sterilized without their consent. And as I just talked about, our legal system is what prevents Native American women from getting the justice that they deserve. So I don't know about you guys, but I would not want to seek social services in the United States at a point in my life when I was feeling the most vulnerable. So what can we do? We need to create services and programs that are run for Native American people by Native American people. We need to give Native American people the power to run their own prevention services. Also, I've been talking about Native American people for this whole presentation in a very general way, but of course there are hundreds of different tribes across the country, and each tribe has its own identity, has its own history, has its own culture. So another big thing is creating services that are specific to tribes. For my project, I've been looking at all three of these things in terms of the Wabanaki Confederacy in Maine. They have very specific, very effective sexual violence healing and prevention centers. It's a confederacy of 5 tribes, and for each tribe they have a different system for sexual violence healing and prevention. And so I've sort of been figuring out the best of their programs and coupling that with my general national resource to create a guidebook for other tribes to tell them how to design, fund, kickstart, and run specific tribal services. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Just to try and, so I can understand the context and scope a little bit more, are these sorts of problems like sexual assault, things like that, more or less prevalent on like reservations compared to Native Americans like living, not like integrated because that word goes wrong, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually think that they're more prevalent for Native American people who are living off of reservations just because there's less of like a cultural connection and protection.
So if they're Native American, but they are assimilated into society pretty well, do they still have to go through the tribal court and all of those other confusing things?
Yeah, well, most Native American people are like assimilated into our culture. So yeah, every single Native American person, as long as they identify as Native American, has to use all 3 of those systems. Okay, so as I've talked about, this is a really complex issue. It's really obviously disheartening, but I want to leave you guys with a Native American proverb from the Hopi tribe, which helps me in finding my peace with this issue and with a lot of other issues, and that proverb is, "We are the ones we have been waiting